Hello, Blood Bowlers. Welcome to episode 5 of the Learn to Play Blood Bowl series. So we have, quickly set up the pitch. We've detailed what we need to do to set up the pitch. We've detailed kind of like what actions are in the last episode alongside, what the turnover is and how the turn works. So now it's time to get on the pitch because we're going to look at moving and how you move players, and not just moving, but how players can move away from others, how players can move through other players' tackle zones, as well as a few other new bits and bobs that are quite interesting that they've added to the game, as well as detailing how stunty players do this, because we actually do have stunty players in the starter box set, and we have stunty players in this on this pitch as well. So they're a little bit different. So we're going to detail movement and how that affects the game. All right, Blood Bowlers. So we're back on the pitch. Actually going to start moving some models around as if we were playing a game now. So the first kind of part we want to look at is movement. So before we look at movement, we need to have a little look at kind of, how a player takes up space on the pitch. So you'll notice that some players here are next to each other and some players aren't. So usually a player that is in another player's tackle zone, which we'll come to in a minute, means that they are marked. A player that doesn't have anybody next to them is open, and it only counts for sort of enemy players. So if you're, next to your own, we have an example here, if you're next to your own player in this situation here, then you're not marking yourself. You can only be marked by opposition players. So the best way to think about it is that any adjacent square to your player is your tackle zone. So anything around there. So for this guy, number 8, a line elf, all of those squares are their tackle zones. And then when it comes to working out if they're marked or not, if we look at number 5 here, the same kind of squares, it's actually been marked by 2 of the Black Hawk players. These 2 here, number 3 and number 1. And the same for number 3. He's actually marked by number 1. And it works the same way around. So number 3 and number 1 are both marked by these 2 line elves. So at the moment, you can't see the whole pitch, but we're just going to zoom in, or we've zoomed in to show the movement a little bit closer up. There's 3 elves that are marked, and the rest of the team are open, so they're free to move. So we're kind of going to emulate what we had in the kickoff in the last or couple of videos back. So we're going to place the ball down. Let's just place it here. So we've had the kickoff, and the ball's landed here. We've had the kickoff event, and now the elf team's going to start to do their move. So every player will have a movement allowance, and that'll be called MA, and it's just a number, and that's effectively how many squares that player can move before they have to start doing other things to move further. So a player can move their movement allowance every turn if they're able to do so, and if they're open, like most of these elves are, they can basically move around for free without causing any problems. So let's say, for example, we want to move number 6 here. Now this player can move 6 squares. So Elven Union lineman, he might just want to move in to get a little assist on this chap here. So he might 1, 2, 3. Now remember, when we finish activations, like we said before, it's best to turn your players around so that you know who you've used. So we've turned them around. He only used 3 of his moves there, which means he still had 3 left, but you don't have to use all of them. What we might do is decide to move this catcher over on this flank 8 squares. So they've got a movement value of 8. So they are particularly quick. Now these guys can zoom in any direction. So it's worth noting that you can, with any player, go diagonally, sort of sideways, whatever you like. That is only 1 move. So this guy's going to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So he's going to move to there, and he's going to be done. However, what every player on the pitch can do is perform a rushing action, which used to be, for older coaches, it used to be go for it, but they've changed it to rushing. Makes sense. So a player can rush an additional square on a roll of a 2+. So every player is a 2+. It's not an agility roll, it's just a straight 2+ roll. So for this elf, he's actually going to go for it, or rush, as it should be called now, to this square on a 2+, which he's achieved, roll of 5+. Now, you can then do it one more time. So you can do it twice for every player. However, it's worth noting that if you rush again and roll a 1, so it's a 2+ roll required, you roll a 1, your player is actually going to fall over. There's a chance for your opponent to injure them. He's actually off the table there, sorry about that, but he's going to fall over. He's going to, effectively, your opponent will get a chance to injure them. And then they might be off the pitch, they might stay stunned, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it is a turnover. So rushing is a good way of getting them extra squares if need be, but it's also a risky business because you might cause a turnover if you roll a 1. And you can use a team reroll to reroll the dice. So in that situation, you might think, you know what, I'm going to use a team reroll, and he would have succeeded in that situation. So we put the catcher back. So players can move into tackle zones. We've kind of shown it a minute ago for free. So before we get into something called dodging, you can, of course, sort of move your players into tackle zones for no penalty. So, for example, this guy might want to move 1, 2, 3, 4. And he gets to move into this Black Orcs tackle zone without actually having to roll any dice. So going in to mark other players adds no like dice rolls or anything like that. So this guy can kind of do that, and you can even then throw maybe a few more in, maybe to get kind of assists that we're going to talk about in the future. But for now, that's just showing you that you can obviously mark people without having to roll dice rolls. So let's shoot back quickly to players who have fallen over. So let's just assume again that this guy failed to go for it. He's fallen down here. He's just failed his rushing roll of a 1, and on the elves' next turn, we're going to assume the Black Orcs kind of had their turn. We get to this turn again, so we get back to the elves' second turn. Players that are prone are able to get up for free, but lose 3 of their movement. So in this situation, this elf can actually get up for 3 squares. So movement of 8, taking away 3, gives you a movement of 5. So this player can then still move 5 squares potentially. So it might go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this or the next turn. Of course, players that are stunned, which is an injury result, if the armor is broken, which we'll get into in future episodes, if they're stunned, then they actually can't get up at all. And it's worth noting that when a player is down on the floor like this, either stunned or prone, they don't exude tackle zones. So, for example, if the Elven Union team had managed to knock both of these dudes down, then there would actually be no tackle zones here. So this elf would be able to kind of walk into here without any penalties or having to roll any dice, which we're going to get into in a second. So players on the floor don't exude tackle zones, and there are there's a few other sort of ways that players can lose their tackle zones. It could be something called hypnotic gaze. It could also be, in this guy's example, the troll, if he fails his really stupid roll, which is a 2+ effectively when he's got friends next to him. If he fails that, he goes stupid, and you can put a dunce hat on them or a marker just to show that they're stupid, and they actually lose their tackle zones. So a lot of the big guys in this game have a nega trait like that. So it's worth checking that out, especially if you've got the new box set and you've got the troll and the ogre. They both have slightly different nega traits, and they can affect like tackle zones and what the players can do. Anyway, we won't get into big guys now, but that's the movement in terms of open players. So now we're going to move into what happens if your players are marked. Okay, so we're going to move a few players around now just to show you what kind of dodging is. So dodging is what you need to do to move away from kind of marked players. So for example, we're going to just pop this guy right in the middle instead of being in that side part there. So this elf will clearly, doesn't probably want to be next to a troll and 2 Black Orcs. So he's probably going to be considering a little dodge away to save himself. Now, what you need to do to dodge away is you're going to have to look at your agility stat, which is AG, and that will be a target dice roll. So you'll need to achieve that dice roll to effectively dodge successfully. And remembering that if you do fail this dodge in any situation, it will be a turnover if your player falls over. So in this situation, when you're dodging, you have to think about where you're dodging to affect your dice roll. So for example, this elf's thinking, I just want to dodge straight back into this square here. Now to do this, the dodge roll would just be a straight 2+. Now, why is that? And the reason is that there's no real sort of negatives to dodging into this square. And you usually have to look at the square you're going to as to determine what your dice roll will be. But in this simple situation, the elf is just going to try and dodge to this square. It doesn't matter how many players are marking him. He could have been marked by 2 more in this position. If he dodges to there, it's just a straight 2+. Which, funnily, in this situation, he would actually fall over. And the opposition team would be able to break his armor and potentially hurt him. But it's an important roll, so we're going to use one of them team re-rolls. We're going to re-roll this. And it's still a 1. But anyway, for reference, this guy will dodge out on a 2+. Now, he gets to continue moving, so that dodge would only be one of his moves. So he could actually continue to move across somewhere else. So that would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example. He's just kind of going up to the top. So you don't necessarily stop moving once you dodge, but you don't have to keep moving, of course. You could just move 1 square to dodge away. But in that situation, he actually would have failed double 1s. But elves are very good because they need 2s across the board to dodge through, dodge away into open space, which is what we would call those squares. So let's change this up a little bit. Let's assume the Black Orcs have had a turn and they've managed to get, a few guys forward in some way. And this little elf thinks, I want to get out of here. And now this might be something you would do at the end of a turn just because it's quite risky, because now you're thinking about where's the best place to dodge. So how you do this is where you're dodging from doesn't count. So these 3 tackle zones don't make a difference. It just means he's marked 3 times. But you could look at squares that are back. So the square we just dodged to actually has a -1 modifier because it has a tackle zone of a Black Orc influencing this square. That's also the same for this square because there's 1 Black Orc here influencing that square. So it would be a -1 modifier. And actually dodging to here is an even worse idea because it's got 2 Black Orcs targeting this square. So that would be -2 instead. So to show you how that would reference or how that would work with this elf, he's a plus or 2+ target roll into open space. But in this situation, he'd actually need a 3+ to dodge to here, which he would achieve. And then if he wanted to dodge again, he'd be able to dodge to open space on a 2+, which he achieves this time around. So that means that he would have used 2 moves and would be able to move, 4 more squares without rushing, of course. And so just to show you the difference in this, he could dodge to here, which is a less favourable dice roll. So making sure you sort of see where your tackle zones are and the best way out of a situation is a great thing to do, because this would actually be a 4+ dodge because it's got 2 negatives to it. So this would be a 4-up dodge and he would fail it, and that would be him on the ground. And then your opposition would do an armor roll and see if they injure the player, and more importantly, it would be a turnover. So sometimes it's a good idea just to keep players tagged, really, unless you fancy doing it at the end of your turn, because it's quite a risky roll. But that 3-up, 2-up dodge succeeded that time around. So actually he would have been free, but moving him to there was the least favourable result. So you probably wouldn't dodge there in that situation. So that's dodging in regards to agility and how that kind of affects things. Now I'll quickly show you a Black Orc situation because they're not particularly good at dodging. So I'm actually going to quickly check the reference sheet. Yeah. So Black Orcs are basically agility 4+. So for them, dodging just into open space is a 50-50 roll. So if this Black Orc fancied dodging away, he would need to roll 4+, which in this situation he would actually achieve. but you can see the difference between teams on the pitch just from the dice rolls here, that the elves can just sort of dodge away into open space on 2s, whereas the Blackhawk team are doing it on 4s. And then, of course, the modifiers that might be in place would make it even more difficult. So usually bash teams struggle to bounce off of the opposition or bounce off of another bash team, for example, whereas elves can kind of flit around and move around quite easily. It's also worth remembering, because it does come up, that a 1 when you're dodging is always a fail, even if you may have some modifiers that make your dice roll a 1+. It more means that the negatives do not affect it as much. So if you have someone who's dodging on 1+, a negative of a -1 will make it 2+, but 1s always fail. So if you've got a 1+ dodge, which is quite rare, then effectively 1s still always fail. It just means that you're more likely to be able to get into spaces and out of spaces than other players, because the negatives or the negative modifiers don't have as much of an impact. And on the flip side, the roll of a 6 is always a success, even if the negatives or the negative modifiers are so great that you can't achieve the dice roll, and it would be like an 8+ roll, which is impossible. A 6 will always succeed. So no matter what you're doing, a 6 will always succeed on a dodge. Now, really, really quickly, I just want to talk about rushing and dodging. So rushing, of course, we've talked about, but it can also be used to get yourself further when you're dodging. So, for example, if this guy here wanted to move, this side of the pitch, he'd be able to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example. And then you have to go for it. Or sorry, I keep calling it go for it. You have to. I really do apologise. It's called rushing. So 2+, he's rushed. And then if he wanted to dodge to, say, this square, for why not, he would need to rush first, which he would fail. Let's assume he passes it. He would rush first, and then he would roll the dodge, which in this situation with the tackle zone would be a 3+, which he would achieve. And that would be his move done, because you can only rush twice. So you do the rushing first before doing the dodge or any pickups or anything like that. So that's dodging and rushing. And then what we're really, really quickly going to talk about, just in terms of stunty players, because if you've got this box set, you're actually going to have quite a few different types of players. And in this situation, we've actually got some stunty players. Now, quickly, what is a stunty player? A stunty player is normally like a smaller type of player. It's like a goblin or a skink, or a Noblar, Snotlings, all them kind of players. Now that basically means that they have a special trait called Stunty. And often, can't think of one that doesn't, they often have dodge as well. So usually with dodging, you'd need to use a team reroll to reroll a failed result. Otherwise it's a turnover. If you fail the dodge, of course. Whereas with stunty players, they have an inbuilt trait called dodge, and dodge allows you to re-roll a dodge roll in your turn without using a team re-roll. It's like an inbuilt thing, and a lot of elf players tend to get hold of dodge quite quickly as well as they start to level up. So for a stunty player, the stunty rule effectively means that they do not suffer tackle zones. So for example, this little guy here, he's a movement of 6. He can quite easily jump through the lines without any real penalty. So he could get somewhere near this ball if he wanted to. So he would go 1, 2, 3. Now he's marked 4 to there. Would normally be a 4-up dodge because he's 3+ normally, but there's a tackle zone. But because he's stunty, he ignores tackle zones. So effectively, that's a 3-up dodge all the time. He'd 3-up dodge this. He's past it. And then he would move to here. He's moving away from a player into another zone that needs a 3+. So he would now need another 3+, which he fails. But because of his dodge skill, he gets to re-roll this dice for free, which he succeeds. So where was he moving from? Here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's going to go to there. For 6, that's his final move, unless he wants to rush. Again, he's got a dodge, but now he's used dodge this turn. He can no longer use it. So he still needs a 3+, even though there's a tackle zone here, which he achieves. And now if he wants to rush to this ball, he'd need to roll a 2+, which he also achieves. And then we do the dodge again. And we're going to assume in this situation he finally fell over. Now, of course, you do not get dodge again, but you could use a team reroll in this situation. But we're not going to do that. And he'll fall over. The opposition player will get to roll the armor. And because he's a stunty player, he's probably likely to get hurt. So they're nimble, agile, don't suffer tackle zones. But when they go down, they tend to die. There's also another skill worth noting here called Titchy, which effectively gives you +1 to dodge. So things like Snotlings and Nobblers, if you're thinking of starting with those two teams, great. You're going to have a lot of fun. And they actually get 2+ dodges without modifiers because they're so small. However, they're even more weak than these guys or the goblins in this situation. So they're very likely to go off themselves, to be honest, or injure themselves, I should say. Right, so that is dodging in a nutshell. I hope it kind of makes sense. What we're going to look at now is a brand new part of the game, which is called jumping. All right, guys. So jumping is a brand new kind of trait that everybody can do. I guess it's not really a trait. It's more of just sort of part of the movement action, really. So any player on the pitch can jump if they're able to move, as long as they're not down on the floor or stunned or have not enough movement to do it. And some other coaches from previous editions will kind of link it with leap, which is another skill entirely. So don't get confused with leap and jump. Jump's about a brand new part of the movement action that basically allows players to jump over prone or stunned players that are on the pitch. So this player is obviously occupying this square, and this player is occupying this square at the moment. And usually, or in the older editions, you would have to move around this player to get out. But now you can jump. So to jump, you effectively need to roll an agility test, and you get to place yourself kind of on the other side of the player. So to do it, you want to roll a 2+. Now, when you're jumping, you get to jump either directly across or in these 3 squares when you're kind of jumping this way. Whereas if you're jumping from a diagonal, you kind of jump sort of diagonally and into 2 squares either side. So you're kind of creating like an L shape. So jumping's like a new way of moving because it used to only be done by leap players, and there was very few of those in the game. But now if you find yourself blocked off, you can attempt to break free, even if it seems like it's impossible. So that was just an example of how it looks one-on-one. But let's say, for example, you've got some guys here who are all bothering you. And let's assume this little elf has the ball and he wants to leap over this line. He could dodge through, but it's quite a lot of rolls. He'd have to sort of go here for a 3+, here for a 3+, there for a 2+. Whereas if you can roll the leap, the jump roll, you'll only need to do one more dodge to get away. So in this situation, he's going to try and jump to this square directly over this downed player. Now, a little bit like dodging, you do look at the negatives from where you are jumping to, but you also look at the negatives of where you're jumping from. So in this situation, where he's jumping from, there's 2 marked players, or he's being marked by 2 players, which would be a -2 modifier. Whereas in the square he's going to, it's a modifier of -1. So in this situation, for jumping, you actually take the worst result. So to jump over this player, this elf would need to roll a 4+, which you actually would fail, and he would then be down in this square. But the ball would bounce, and the opposition player would get to roll on the armor and see if they injure him. So that's jumping in some regards. There's also a situation where if you roll a straight 1, you don't get to do that, and you fall down straight into this square instead. So it's worth checking through the page just as you kind of work your way through. But effectively, any roll other than a straight 1 means you're going to be falling over in your target square, or more preferably, still up, still in possession and able to move away. Which in this case, you of course would fail anyway. A player that wants to then move forward would have lost 2 of his movement doing this. So you still count it as 2 moves and would still have 4 left. So he'd be able to shoot off 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, if that dodge had succeeded. So it kind of takes up your movement, but it's another way of getting your players out of sticky situations. And you can also jump over your own players if you need to. So it might be better to leave a player down near you and try and go for that sort of jump than to try and get another player up, dodge them away to allow you to move out and through. So it's a new little change. It's a little bit fiddly, but it's a way of moving around that's different and interesting. So that is jumping. So another important part of the movement phase is one of the one turn actions, or once per turn actions, which is a thing called the Blitz. So every single turn, each coach gets to do one of these with one of their positionals. So for example, here we're going to showcase one of the Black Orcs doing a Blitz. Now, blitzing is like a mixture of blocking and movement, but we're going to show how the kind of process works here, and then you'll be able to extrapolate that to the injuries and armor rolls in the blocking episode. So effectively, this guy gets to move his normal distance and he gets to hit something if you're declaring a Blitz. So I'm the Black Orc coach, and number 5 here is going to declare a Blitz, and he's going to go 1, 2, 3, and he's movement of 4, and he has to use that 4th movement to hit the player. So that player is the 4th hit. And when he's doing that, he then gets to roll block dice, which we'll explain soon, but you'll roll 2 dice in this situation, and then you get to smack said player down. You can, of course, then follow up and continue as you wish. So, for example, if this player had been here instead of further back, he would have been able to declare a Blitz, which would have been a 1, 2 for the Blitz itself, rolls the dice. Let's say he powers him down, just for reference, knocks him down, gets to follow. So that would still only be 2 moves, because the follow is all part of the movement values. The ball would bounce in this situation, which we're just going to say is to here for the moment. But this Black Orc's still got 2 moves left. So he has used 2 to hit the guy, but he could then still move 2 squares to kind of mark the ball there. And then he would be done, and then can still, of course, rush. So you might find yourself in a situation where this guy wants to blitz from here. That's a 1, 2, 3, 4. He's only movement 4. So he would actually have to rush to hit this guy, which he succeeds and can continue to hit him. So it's worth remembering that you need to roll the rushing roll. If you need to roll the rushing roll to achieve a Blitz, you have to do it. And you have to do it before you roll the block. So you can't do the block first and then do your 1. And then you can move before or after the Blitz, or the blocking part of the Blitz. So, for example, if he was standing here, you could declare a Blitz and you can roll your dice, which in this case he would do, is use 1 of his movement for the Blitz, and then he could go 2, 3, 4, for example. So the block part of the Blitz can be at the beginning, at the end, in the middle. It can be wherever you want. And if you have to rush to do it, then you need to rush to do it. So another situation you might come up with or come across is, let's say, we'll just put some guys here for reference. Got some assisting guys here. We're going to get a blitzer. This guy is on the floor, but he's only prone. And of course, we already know that you can get up for 3 moves. So he's actually going to declare a Blitz. He's going to get up for 3. So he's lost 3 of his moves. And I believe their movement's 7. So he's still got 5 moves left. He's then going to hit this guy for his 4th move. And with some assists, he's got 2 dice. And he's actually going to knock him down. He's going to follow. So he's already used 4 of his moves. And he's going to go 5, 6, 7 and be done instead. So you can blitz from the floor as well. So that's blitzing in terms of how you move, and we'll explain what happens to these players. But it's also worth remembering that if you don't follow up, so which is where you follow a player after you've hit them, then you still lose that movement. So you've got to imagine that movement's used just to do the blitz. All right, well, that's blitzing. Let's move on really quickly to picking up the ball. All right, guys, so there's only really one thing left that I want to kind of go over in the movement phase, and that is being able to move and do things like pick up the ball. So the ball will obviously be loose when it's on the pitch like this. We're just imagining back to our kickoff. So any player can move, pick up the ball, and then continue to move. So in this situation, the ball's in free open space. So anybody can come and get it, and they roll a straight agility test to pick it up. So this elf's actually going to come and get it. He's going 1, 2, 3. And he's just got to roll a 2+ roll, which he does, which means that he is now in possession. Now he can continue to move after this. So he might go, where was he? 1, 2, 3. He might go 4, 5, 6 to there, just to keep himself safe. So you can continue to move, and then you can, of course, rush. You can do all other kind of things. If you've got to dodge into the space where the ball is, then you'll need to do that as well. So all of the previous rules can be used. And if you find yourself landing on a ball, you have to try and pick it up. You can't just leave the ball where it is. However, if a player is moved involuntarily onto the ball, i.e. they're pushed into it, or they're prone and they get pushed onto it as well, then the ball will effectively bounce. And that's also what happens when, we'll use this as an example again, 1, 2, 3. This is what happens if you fail the pickup. So in this case, only a 1 is going to fail the pickup here. The ball will then bounce. If we grab our trusty little DBL thing here, it will bounce to the 6, which in this situation is to there. And that would be a turnover. So any failed pickup would be a turnover. Even if the ball kind of bounces onto another player and they catch it, it's still a turnover. So you need to be careful when picking up the ball. It's not necessarily something you might want to do first. You might want to try and do a few other things. The only time it's good to try and pick up the ball quickly is if it's in a really dangerous position. So let's show another example of picking up the ball, which is a little bit different. So let's say, for example, the ball is here. We won't go into why it might be there, but it's landed there for some reason. Our thrower can run in and pick it up still for free without being tagged, but he will then have modifiers on this pickup. So for example, it'll be 1, 2, 3, like before. However, this pickup's going to be a little bit more difficult because we've got 2 players who are effectively marking the ball, but they've effectively tagged it. So they are exuding tackle zones on this ball, making it a little bit more difficult to pick up. So for each player with a tackle zone on it, it's -1. So in this case, that 2+ roll becomes a 4+ roll. So he's going to try and pick this ball up, and he actually achieves it. So he'd actually be in possession here and would then probably want to dodge away, which into an open square would be a 2+. And then he can continue moving his additional couple squares. So picking up balls in tackle zones is really tough, and you want to try and get as many players off the ball before you attempt it. But other than that, that's kind of the movement phase. Remember, every player can move. There's no limit. Every player can dodge if they need to. Every player can jump in their move if they will really want to. Remembering, though, of course, if you fail a dodge or fail a jump, or in this case, fail a pickup, it will be a turnover. So you've got to be very careful. It's always good to think about the players that are open, which in this case, for the elf team, was most of the players. So you'd probably want to move your guys around into a new formation before you start attempting your dodges into space or your blitzes, for example. And that's the only other thing to remember, is that you get 1 blitz a turn. And we'll detail how the blitz damages your opponent in the next episode. But for now, that's movement. I hope that helps, and we'll see you soon.